We have a lot of lessons today. I often do. I try to get a lot of preachers, the great Dr. Spurgeon would always have one verse as the beginning of a sermon. Then he might bring in other verses later, but they weren't the verse. That's one way to teach it. But I think particularly on this topic, we need to have several verses because I'm going to make some distinctions between what we as individuals and what we as a church might have as our responsibility to help the needy. I remember when I first started being a preacher, and that was in 2009, thanks to somebody that got me a no-paying job in Cleveland Methodist Church. Now, we're not going to say who that was. We're going to keep that silent. All I can keep is silent about that because it's embarrassing who it was, but we're not going to say who it was. No, it's a bit of blessing. Well, let's start. I'm going to read these not in the order that these readings have been put into order today, not necessarily every day, that they're found in the Bible. But they're not going to be all of them used in their order here to give some power to my sermons. And the power is the Word of God. Okay? If I could do nothing but stand up here and read the Bible to you for 45 minutes, I would know you'd be blessed because the Bible is a blessing. And but I'm going to try to reach a conclusion today, and I'm going to start with the words of Jesus, which are on your second page of your book, inside of your book. Matthew 5. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not away. This is a broad statement of obligation, of compassion, of meeting the needs of the other person. Now this business about if somebody compelled you to go a mile, the Romans were allowed to grab anybody off the street and have them carry their pack for a mile. So you may be in some kind of a big business deal at the gate of Jerusalem, a Roman guard comes by, or several of them, they grab the whole group and put a pack on all their backs, and off you go for a mile walk. And you could not say no to that. And Jesus is to say, if somebody compels you to go a mile, a soldier or anybody, they take force and compel you, go an extra mile. And then they'll see that their compelling you was not the reason you were nice to them. I assume that's what Jesus is saying here. If a lot of people would probably complain, and not too loudly, to an armed soldier about this abuse. But if you as a Christian go beyond what they're making you do, then it's obvious that you have the will to help them out, even when they made you do it for a while. What I'm going to say about this verse and some of the others that will be at the beginning of our lesson is that these are the requirements for individuals, not churches. Churches have a lot of responsibility, we'll get to it. But I see this as a proclamation to Jesus, from Jesus to everybody, and to do these things, even if they're not a Christian, to follow his advice. As I was going to say earlier, one of the first things I ran into as a new preacher was requests over the phone for large sums of money to rehook up somebody's electricity and pay a month or two of their bills because they got their electricity or the water shut off. And the rehookups are very expensive. And I found out when I moved here to Lebanon Memorial that their policy is one used by the Christian Center that used to be down there by the Lost Sock. Man, that just drives me crazy to laugh about that. That they would not pay rehookup fees because they had found that a lot of people got rehooked up and couldn't make their payment even for the next month. So they husband their resources. They only had so much money that they'd given in by churches for a year. And that was one thing that they didn't generally do. The emergency health office for the county also did not regularly do that. And the policies have been set up in this part of the country, which I didn't know when I was on a little grassy creek or at Lakeview Church, is that you have a deal with the utility companies. You call up and saying, this is Lebanon Memorial Church. We will pay the bill for so-and-so. You always get the bill in front of you so you know it's truly. And you read off the fees, and then you send a check right to the utility company so that you do not find that the money ends up somewhere else. Well, it was I still get calls quite often. I'd say 3 times a month sometimes, because I was a connection when I was in Lebanon for people who were having financial trouble. And so they have my personal phone number, which I gave them gladly to the listing agency. And of course, now I'm in a different church and I don't have any policies. And I kind of want to get some with you about what I should do and what the Bible requires of us to do. Let's go to our second reading, and that's the Job reading. Job chapter 31. This is part of, it's very similar to the verse we just read out of Psalms. Verse 6, Job 31. If I have withheld the poor from their desire, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel myself alone, and the fatherless has not eaten thereof, for from my youth he was brought up with me, and with my father, and I have guided her from my mother's womb. So he's talking about the orphan. If I have seen any perish for want of clothing, or any poor without covering, if his loins have not blessed me, and if he were not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have lifted up my hand against the fatherless, when I saw my help in the gate, then let mine arm fall from my shoulder blade, and mine arm be broken from the bone. So he's cursing it himself with a pretty bad curse here. If he ever does these cold-hearted things to widows, to the fatherless, orphans, and to the poor, and those who are in need. Once again, I see this as a personal obligation we all people of God have. When you're walking down the street, or if you get a call from somebody, and they are somebody who needs a few dollars to help out, and we give out $50 bills at one time for you all to give away. We had some interesting results from that. But I see this as a personal responsibility. And Jesus' statement we just read isn't got any wiggle room. It said, if you remember, give to him that asketh thee. And this is something that I try to follow. If I'm walking down the street and a panhandler comes up to me, and I often ask them what do they need the money for. And if they say alcohol or drugs, a few times they'll tell you that honestly, I say I'm not really going to harm you with my gift. If they say they are hungry and they need money, I will generally, being a male, it's easier for me to do this than women, take him to a diner nearby or something. And I used to do this when I lived in New York City. I walked down Times Square and people would want to have cash. Well, generally, if possible, I give them what they ask for rather than what the money is. I give them food if they're hungry. Anyway, that's been my practice. But there's no wiggle room in give to him that asketh thee. I've told the story before some places. I was in a city somewhere else. I was walking down the road, and there was a man who was panhandling money. He called to me when I went by. And I'm thinking of this verse to give to him that asketh me. But I couldn't take him to eat something or to buy some clothes or something. I was in a foreign city for a meeting. And so I reached in my pocket and gave him some money. And as I was handing it to him, a well-dressed person went by, man, said I was like an idiot for giving money to strangers, you know. And a pretty good-looking suit, probably worth 5 of my suits now. And he was saving his money. That was the smart way to go. And he knew a lot of panhandlers, and it's true. They are panhandlers for religious groups like the Moonies. They are making huge amounts of money by being in some corners with their difficulty. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie, I can't recommend it, but I once did see it about the practice in India back when, and probably still today, was to get kids off the street that are orphans, and they're living on the street, and they're begging and all, to bring them in, treat them nice, tell them they're going to have a great future, feed them like crazy, and then to maim their bodies so that they could beg for it. And the picture they had in the movie was they would pour poison in the eyes of little girls so that they would have a patch on their eye and get more money when they begged. Well, they might have another person crippled or something. And these kids who thought they were being saved from their torturous existence were only being used by people to make money. It's a little bit like with Oliver Twist, I think where Dickens said that all the kids were being trained by their master to be better beggars and pocket thieves and everything. And sometimes adults take advantage of children. And we hear a lot of problems of coming across the border with children arriving by themselves, or dying in the river coming by themselves, or being sold. And now, just yesterday, I heard a report that they were finding a lot of these private company children were being sold for their organs, so rich people could get a kidney or something. And this is a horrible thing. Well, let's look at our third reading, which will be James, the book of James. James 2, beginning at verse 15. If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, Depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, Thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith with my works, or by my works. Thou believest that there is one God, thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead. So we are supposed to be, and I had a person I was counseling who was worried about their future in heaven and all, because they had not done enough work. And by asking them a few questions, I can show that they had done quite a bit, or had been a Christian for a long time. And that it wasn't by works that saves you. We know that faith is what saves you. But if you've been saved, your gratitude alone to Jesus for this eternally wonderful gift would make you want to follow Jesus' commands. And if you are not willing to do that, your faith is dead. It is without effect on you. If you continue to be cruel to people, ungenerous to the needy, and you call yourself a Christian, something's messed up somewhere. You need to get with the program and follow the words of Jesus. Now, that was our third reading. Our fourth reading is from Old Testament, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 10, beginning of verse 17. For the Lord your God is a God of gods, and Lord of lords, a great God, mighty and terrible, which regardeth not persons, nor taketh reward. So big shots don't give special treatment. He don't regard the person as a person, and he doesn't take bribes. You can give a lot of money to the Lord, and the Catholics got in trouble with Martin Luther over this and formed the Protestant Reformation 500 years ago because they were selling forgivenesses in the name of Jesus. And this guy made Martin Luther put his 99 Theses, nail them to the outside door of his Catholic church. And he was eventually excommunicated from the church for saying that you're not saved by works and faith, but only by faith. In the Bible, throughout the Bible, in Romans, is what Martin Luther found that changed his mind about that Catholic teaching. But other books, also like Ephesians, make it very clear that it's by faith alone that you're saved. Faith in Jesus Christ. Believe on him and you shall be saved. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. You could have no faith in Jesus, be a member of the church, and be the biggest donor to the church. It's not going to do you any good when you get to before the Lord for judgment final. Now, this reading from Deuteronomy, I am going to postulate to you that the people of Israel, the chosen people living in the chosen land, were like a church. This is not a brand new thought by anybody. It's often looked at the temple as a future churches, you might say in a way, and also the Israelites as being a model for the rest of the Gentiles when they come and listen to God's word, as the Israelites sometimes did, sometimes didn't. And therefore, I think Moses talking to the people, all the people at one time, in verse 18, he doth execute the judgment of the fatherless and the widow, and loveth the stranger, in giving him food and raiment. And this, I believe, is for the congregation of the people following God. And the people listed are the fatherless and the widow, who've been listed by other verses we've read, and the orphans and widows. But here they conclude this stranger. And that would be like to us is somebody maybe who comes in and joins our church that we don't know. come to Israel to become proselytes in the Jewish religion. And they'd be trained, their male would be circumcised. And the stranger was always given better treatment in Israel than probably anywhere else in the world at that time. They weren't an outcast. They weren't racially treated improper. And I seem to have a fly that loves me. So I think this is really more a group of godly people's responsibility. He's talking to the whole people of God when he's talking about this. But you may disagree. And our last one is 1 Timothy chapter 5. And this is specifically, obviously, specifically for the church. And I know no church that follows these requirements. They try, they do various things. But listen to how many people are, how small the group is that the church is responsible for benevolence. You as an individual are responsible as a Christian for anything anybody asks you. I think it'd be Bill Gates with the billions and billions of dollars. He asked you, loan him $10, he should loan you a little something. I don't think he's destitute. But let's read these interesting verses from 1 Timothy chapter 5, beginning of verse 9. Let not a widow be taken into the number under 80 years old. So let not a widow be taken under the financial help of the church if they're under 60 years old, 80. Having been a wife, she should also not only be elderly, having been the wife of one man, well reported for her good works, if she have brought up children, if she have lodged strangers, here we see the stranger mentioned again, if she have washed the saints' feet, if she have relieved the afflicted, if she have diligently followed every good church work. But the younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry. And, skipping to verse 14. I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. And skipping down to verse 16, if any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them. Let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. We also say in the book of Acts, quite a dispute within the brand new churches as to the Jewish widows getting better treatment than the Gentile widows. And they were chastised for that. Everybody should be treated the same based on your need. But the church, and he's talking to Timothy, the leader of the church is not responsible for anyone who asks. But you as an individual that doesn't have as much money as the church are. And you develop a one-on-one personal relationship with the person asking for money. Meanwhile, the church has higher things to do. Yes, they should be, their heart should go out for the needy of the needy, like these widows. And she's encouraged to help strangers. I think we would add orphans as another group here without stretching the Bible too far. And this is an extreme poverty in their culture. Women were not trained to be job workers, or carpenters or anything. They were expected. They had enough to do by giving birth to babies. I always consider, and I'll say this on Mother's Day again, that the bravest person in the world is a woman that's pregnant. Because that's got to be a scary thing to think of. And the pain that is coming. a sacrifice that you give every day, feeding tube. You get kicked around for your trouble, and there's not many men, even brave men who charge up hills in their farm, that would volunteer for that kind of duty. And how crucial it is for society. As God said to Adam and Eve, first command, be fruitful and multiply. Now I can encourage that, I can encourage that verse a little bit when there's younger people in the office, in the room, and I say, God wants you to have sex. Be fruitful and multiply. But, do it within marriage. Well, this verse is specifically talking about the church's obligations. It is much more strict than any church I know follows. The point here is that the main reason for the church to have goods is not to be a social service agency, like it's becoming more and more what they are turning into, but to be a spreader of the gospel and an educator of the believers to become sanctified. Nobody else is doing this. The church is getting new converts through evangelism and is also edifying the saints like you people. And therefore, I feel that maybe what we should have as a policy is not what is usually done, but to have a strict list. It could be a little more generous than this or not, of which people the church will dig deep into their evangelical money for. And this is a form of social gospel, which we don't want to encourage, but is also a kind of a time of compassion for Christians, people in our church who have been living a saintly-like life and have reached a situation, no fault of their own, where they cannot make ends meet for the basics. And for these people, we need to dig deep as a church and preserve our resources for these people, not strangers who are calling around the 50 churches and trying to get them to pay some bill there. And if you ask them, well, why don't you come, we'll talk about it, why don't you come to church next time? I've yet to have one of them show up. That doesn't mean that they won't. I should say there's one person who did show up, God bless her soul, and I dug in my pocket for them. I got to preach a gospel message to them. That's worth a lot of money to me. And they were a stranger, so to speak, in our area from another culture. So I felt it was appropriate for me myself to dig into it. But I think I may have even asked the church for a little extra money for their needs. But we do not take in anybody who calls as a church, non-Christian, people not willing to listen to the gospel. And we spend all of our wealth on those people. Once I was on the list, there's a lot of people called me. I said, well, have you called the emergency office here in Russell County? No, or yes. Have you called one of the big churches, like Rosedale Church and all that? Yeah, we've called it. We've called everybody. And I don't know if they got money from everybody too. There was one group of family about 5 years ago. They hit all three of my churches on consecutive Sundays. You come to one church, they have two little toddlers, and they're so needy. And you look at them and you say, oh gosh, family in need, you don't see that. And so we dig deep. Then next week, a person came into Grassy Creek Church and said, there was a family out there, said they were poor. I gave them $200. That's more than the guy from Sulphur Springs. Anyway, I talked to you talk to other churches. They say, yeah, these people have been hidden in all the churches. Sometimes the woman only speaks English. Sometimes it's the man. They are basically milking the system for anything they can get. Well, you cannot assume that, like the guy that was chastising me for handing up some money on the street to the beggar. I do not know what that beggar's situation was. Was he gaming the system? He may have. I don't have time. I wish I had time to spend more with him. But, this is where I see, anyway, our church obligation to establish kind of cutoffs like Timothy is doing here. For what Christians are people who are searching to be Christians, what their needs are. And are they able-bodied men and women? Well, they're supposed to go to their families. Do they have 10 children and 5 brothers and sisters? Well, let their family take care of them. If they are all alone in the world, well, then our heart needs to go out to them. Especially if they're older, a stranger, or an orphan. Anyway, that's the way I see it. I covet your comments on this sermon because it's not just a reading a Bible lesson, that would be enough, but it's also trying to set a policy for our congregation. This congregation for size is very wealthy. It doesn't mean, though, we need to not be frugal with the Lord's resources for reaching out with the gospel. Anyway, that is a lesson for today. We need to also maybe recognize and give myself a note here that this cutoff of 60 years that Paul sent to Timothy, that was in a culture where the average person lived only 40 years. So if somebody, a 60-year-old, was quite unique. And that's another thing to think of. There were very few women that would meet this requirement. I don't know if we have to stick to an age exactly, but we probably want to give very little, if anything, to Christians who are coming in and are not willing to work when they're able. We'll give them a job. Well, that's the message for today. I'm glad you all came.